Hello, welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brendan Pugh, and in today's episode, we are going to be reviewing the book Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Huzzah! All right, so the first thing I want to start off with is that I really loved this book. I was a big fan. It took me a long time to read it. I just read it really slow. And I'm a big fan of Brandon Sanderson in general, but I have actually not read a lot of his stuff, so I'm working my way through it. And The Way of Kings was just such a great book. I was super, super impressed by it. And so it was kind of hard for me to find some things I didn't like about it, as is my routine, I guess, with these review videos. I like to do 5 things that are my favorite and 5 things that are my least favorite. And so I did find 5 things that I wanted to point out. So we are going to jump right into it. So here are my 5 least favorite things about The Way of Kings. Here we go. Number 1, it's hard to follow in the beginning. Now, this is kind of a trait that is inherent of anytime you start a new series, but in particular with this book, I really struggled with all the interludes and it changed characters a lot. And so jumping into it and not knowing anything about the story and how it's supposed to be, I was totally lost. It took me a really long time to really start to get my bearings and understand which characters were which. And, you know, kind of, he doesn't really reveal how some of the characters are interconnected until a little bit later in the story. So when it first started, I was struggling with connecting with the characters because I didn't know who anyone was, and I didn't know, like, it just kept jumping around. And then on top of that, it had has some interlude sections in the book that I really struggled to understand why they mattered. Obviously, he wouldn't put them in the story if they didn't matter, but as someone who is just starting out picking up these books, I just really struggled with getting into it at first, and it took me a while until I got probably about halfway through the book where I really start feeling like, okay, this is really picking up and I'm really enjoying this. I had a very similar reaction when I started The Wheel of Time, which of course I'm not done with. But that first book of Wheel of Time, I just really struggled with liking it at all. I've actually started and restarted that book multiple times. So with The Way of Kings, I just had that similar feeling of, I just struggled to get started with the story. Number 2, I couldn't always connect with the characters, at least till the very end. It kind of stems off of that not really knowing what was going on and having a hard time getting into it. The characters did not hook me from the beginning. I struggled to care too much about any of them. I'd say probably the ones I connected most with was probably Delinar. I connected with his character, but other than that, I struggled with really all of them having any sort of I really want to keep reading and I really want to know what's going to happen next with these characters. The thing that got me the most was the world building. I love the world building, and so we'll get into that a little bit later in the video, but the world building held me more than the characters. And to me, that wasn't maybe the strongest start because your characters obviously are what need to carry the story. Getting into book 2, I'm way invested in the characters now, but it took me a long time. I was not invested in the characters at first, probably until the very end. And then once the end of the book started to wrap up, I started to actually get invested in characters. Number 3, they went to war for good reason, but how they fight the war doesn't make any sense. Now, again, this will probably be something that is a plot point later on, and it's kind of becoming that as I'm starting to read book 2. But when you read about what happens in the beginning and why the war starts, and then they start showing how they're fighting the war, it just kind of made, again, it didn't help with the getting me engaged part. Again, this was definitely a book where I didn't really get engaged until kind of the last 2/3 and half of the story. And so that was just another thing where it was like they went to war and they show the reason in the beginning why they go to war. And then when they're at war, you're just like, I don't understand why they're doing this. This doesn't make any sense to me. So again, I think that's probably a plot point that's going to show up in later books. People that have read the book, of course, anyone who's watching this that's read the book are going to know, you're probably think I'm silly for thinking that I don't like that. But in the beginning book, again, this first book was hard for me to get into. And that was another reason why, where it's like they go to war, it's a good reason at first, and then the way they start fighting the war, you're kind of like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand this. Number 4, it was really hard to care about the interludes. He's got a lot of interludes, and of course this is a big sprawling epic, so it's kind of split into parts, and then there's interludes in between each part. And when I was already struggling with the rest of the characters and I was already struggling to connect with those, adding in these little interlude things, I was just not... I was struggling with that. I was like, I don't understand why I have to also try to care about all these characters too. It's kind of that whole, it's just kind of character overload. Like there's so many characters for you to have to care about. And then I was already struggling with the main ones. When we added in the other ones with the interludes, it just wasn't holding my attention. Number 5, they are very large books and probably some of it is a little unneeded. Again, I have to give credit to the fact that this is a long series and obviously things are going to pay off after a while, and it's going to take us a while to get there. But I did feel like the book was overly, probably longer than it needed to. They built the character building is really there, but it takes a long time to get there. And I felt like some of that could have been condensed because I started to get the gist of where some of the character development was going pretty early on. And so the fact that it kind of keeps hammering that with each character, some of that could have been condensed. I felt like it was a little extra long. It didn't need to be quite so long. But ultimately it paid off in the end because we got to the end of the book and I really, really enjoyed it. So, and here are the top 5 favorite things that I loved about this book. Number 1, Delinar. Delinar was indeed my most favorite character. I thought that he had a great arc. He had a great story. Him being part of the royal family, but also being a high prince and how it all plays out. Then he has a bit of a mystery going on with him. I don't want to give any spoilers for anyone who hasn't read it, but he definitely was the character that I liked the most in this story and I identified with the most. And so he was a highlight of the story, even from basically the beginning to the end. He was the one character that I really connected well with, and his storyline I think is really great. And going into book 2, it's really great continuing forward. And I think how it ends at the end of book 1, the way it wraps up was just like some of the best writing I've read. It was really great. I really loved his particular story. Number 2, Caledon's powers and abilities. Now, I'm not going to give anything away, but obviously it's not a big jump to know that some people are going to gain powers. And as Caledon's character develops and when he ends up having powers, it's just really cool. It's really cool how it happens. It's really cool how he uses it. And I was also not expecting some of the connections that were made beforehand and how then all of a sudden when they start happening to Caledon, you realize, oh, wow, this is, he's the same as this. And so the way that his powers manifested and how they were slowly seeded, the way he wrote Caledon's powers coming to fruition was really cool. It was a really slow burn and you kind of noticed some things, but you didn't really think anything was happening. And then it starts to just happen and it's really cool. It's very organic. I felt like it was a super organic way for everything to manifest. And then how it ends up getting used in the end, the writing is just superb. The fight scenes are superb. How it all works and the mechanics are really awesome. So I really loved Caledon's powers. Number 3, the fight scenes. I loved how he wrote the fight scenes, how they write the fight scenes with the shard bearers and the enemies and the good guys, and how everything but depending on the character, all feels really unique to that character and to that group of people. And so I thought that the fight scenes were written really well and done really well. He really crafted that whole narrative well. It feels like it's a part of the story and not just we're having a battle because it's cool. Number 4, everything wove together really well in the end. So, as I was saying in the thing the top 5 that I didn't really like, one of the things I didn't like is I was really lost in the beginning. I was really lost as the story started, and it took me a really long time to figure it out. That being said, once it got to the end, like those last chunk of chapters, how everything just kind of weaves together and comes together was masterful storytelling. And it really made up for the fact that I didn't understand anything that was going on in the beginning. I would have liked to been able to not be so confused early on. But again, the way that it all wove together and how all of the storylines came together in the end made up for the fact of all my confusion in the beginning. And number 5, there are so many layers. The world building is so rich. Down to, the animals and the characters, how the weather functions, what everything looks like. It was so vivid. It was so easy for me to picture not only what he, is describing, but then to feel like it's a real world. It felt so real. It's a really cool, every single layer of, there's different religions and there's different cultural groups. There's different creatures and landscape. It's so detailed and rich, which that was, as I said in the top 5 things I didn't like, the world building was the thing that kept me going. So where I wasn't so connected with the characters and I wasn't so connected with some of the storylines and understanding what was going on, the world building itself was enough to pull me through the story, because I just wanted to see, how does this work? How does that work? What is that? How does, why is this way? So the world building is so incredibly cool, and it's just really one of the best examples of world building, I think, in any story I've ever read. That's it for this review of Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you pick up the book and read it. I think it's worth your time. It's worth doing. Make sure to leave a comment below. Let's talk about it. Let me know if you've read the book or what you think of the book, and we will see you next time on Writing Quest. Huzzah!